I'd like to start out this morning a little bit differently. I recently had the opportunity to go through an evangelism class with some fellow brothers and sisters, and in that process, I realized that for some of us, sharing the gospel isn't something that we automatically know how to do. So I'm just going to share with you a really basic way that I share the gospel with people when God gives me the opportunities to. And this requires that they believe that God is real, which that can take some time depending on who you're talking to. You know, most people believe that God exists and God's real. There's very few people that don't believe in a spiritual world. So once I can get them to that point where they believe God is real and that they believe God can create, and then I have this conversation with them. I talk to them about how God created our universe and our world and us with perfection. There are no flaws. When he made the first DNA strand of Adam, it had no faults in it. It was perfect. There was no doubts. There was no fears. There was no loss. There was no lack. There was no cancer. No mosquitoes. No calories. And that was where humanity existed. But God also gave us something else. He gave us perfect union with Him. There was no division between us and God at all. It was only connectivity. But perhaps the most powerful thing He gave humanity was choice. You see, God didn't want robots. He wanted people to love Him back. And He could have. He could have made us all little wind-up robots where He winded us up for our lifetime and said, there you go. But He didn't. He wanted us to love Him as much as we could, the same way He loved us. So He gave us choice. And it doesn't matter what the choice was. It could have been, don't walk on this path, or don't drink from this stream, or don't stay the night on this island. And God gave us the choice of don't eat from this tree. And we told God no. Humanity said, I'm going to trust myself over you. And I'd like to blame Adam and Eve, I really would. I mean, part of me wants to meet Adam and just slap him upside the head. What were you thinking? But I know the reality is I would have done it too. No one of us can say we haven't contributed to the problem of sin, right? And so there we are with this perfect God who loves us perfectly and completely, who is perfectly merciful but perfectly just. And He is faced with this creation that He desperately craves to have relationship with. Now has this wall, this canyon, this impassable division between Him and us called sin. And God gives us the solution. And as crazy as it is, as insane as it is, it's Jesus. The way to bridge the distance between us and God is simply trust Jesus. That's it. There's no magic formula. There's no magic hand waves. There's no list of things you have to be before Jesus is good enough for you and you're good enough for Jesus. It's just wherever you are, whoever you are, however you are, trust Jesus. So at this point in the conversation, the person I'm talking to is left with a choice, aren't they? Just like we were. They're left with this choice of, do I trust Jesus or do I say no? And of course, I'm hoping most of us in this room said yes. And here we find ourselves, the forgiven. This group of messed up sinners trapped together as the family of God. I'm so sorry you're connected to me through the blood of Jesus, but you are. I had a brother send me this, and I want to share this with you, this idea of forgiven. He sent me this text this week. He said, I have to go to Washington. Sorry to miss you speak Sunday. He said, listen to Crowder, Forgiven, and share a tear of joy with me before you go to church and speak. So he knows me well. And he says, I wish I could put words to what you, Mike, and Jeremiah have helped me with. Short version is this. I take Jesus with me everywhere. I am happy and whole and can't believe it. And that's what God does. So, I didn't listen to Crowder on the way here this morning. I'm going to listen to it with you if you're okay with that. All right, we're going to play it. No grave going to hold us. All the weight of all our evil lifted away, forever free. Who could believe? And so here we find ourselves somehow impossibly part of the forgiven. Somehow Jesus impossibly took on the cross all of our imperfections and gave to us all of his perfection. And that is not possible, but it's the truth. So here we are, the broken, the battered, the beautiful bride of Christ, trying to figure out how to do gospel life together, how to live like the forgiven. And in Matthew, in his gospel, in chapter 5, he records some of the teachings of Jesus about how to live this gospel life together. In chapter 5, typically these are called the Beatitudes. Not typically, they are called the Beatitudes. And we're going to look at this section today in Matthew chapter 5. If you are willing, would you please, and able, would you stand with me, please? And we'll read Matthew 5, 1 through 12. Can you believe they let me up here without Kleenex? I had to find this Kleenex last service. All right. And when he saw the multitudes, he went up on the mountain. And after he sat down, his disciples came to him. And opening his mouth, he began to teach them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Verse 9, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons and daughters of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men cast insults at you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad. For your reward in heaven is great, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. You may be seated. So I'd like to set the scene a little bit before we get going. And in this scene, that Jesus is at a point in his ministry where he's very popular. He has thousands of people following him around. And it's hard for us to imagine this, but just think of half of Emmett left whatever they were doing and followed some guy around the countryside for a while. Over to Nampa, Caldwell, just walking around. Half of Emmett. Just imagine what that would be like. And that's how popular Jesus was. He was healing people. He was casting out demons. He was fixing people's problems with miracles. And in this thousands of people, there would have been 4 groups I could think of. And the first group would have been the people that were there for the miracles. They weren't really interested in God or Jesus. They were just there for the quick fix. They certainly weren't interested in anyone telling them what to do. They wanted Jesus to fix their health or their wealth or their marriage or their bank account. They just saw Jesus as a way to get what they wanted. And the second group was the religious group. And these were the people that had made their list of really bad sins over here, which they never did, and their list of not so bad sins over here, which, they did occasionally. And heaven forbid if you did any of these sins over here in the really bad list, whatever they were, because then they would take the truth of God and they would beat you into submission and fear with what was supposed to bring life and grace. They were there to judge Jesus and everyone else who sinned differently than they did. And the third group was the one that had believed the lie of the world. They had believed that they and God had a deal. I leave God alone, he leaves me alone. They had carried their doubt and their fears and condemnation for far too long, and they had figured if God is real, he wasn't real to me. They had long ago abandoned the idea that grace could ever be given to them. So they pursued pleasure because why not? They thought if God exists, then he, she, or whatever has no right to tell me what to do. And the final group began with the men and women sitting at Jesus' feet. And this group only knew one thing. They were messed up. And this Jesus, he was not possible. If he could cause the lame to walk and the blind to see, then maybe he could heal their hearts. Maybe, just maybe, they could find grace, no matter what the religious people said. So Jesus sat down to teach in front of a group of people not too differently than a lot of churches in America today. So that's the scene. That's his audience. And I'd like to go over some definitions and word usage in this passage that we can't understand the passage without them. And the first one is in verse 2 when he says he opened his mouth. That's not a fancy way to say he said. In Greek, that has two connotations. And the first is that this is a formal teaching. And also the part where he sat down, that's what rabbis would do in those days. They would teach sitting down. And so it meant that these words were important and they needed to be treated as important. And the second thing it meant, let me read this to you because I don't want to mess it up. These words were straight from the mind and the heart of the teacher teaching them. So this phrase, he opened his mouth, meant that these words were unfiltered truths straight from the heart of the King of the universe. Did you catch that? And the way Matthew uses the Greek verb usage here is that this wasn't a one-time deal. This was how Jesus always taught. This was always how he showed his heart to his followers, his students. So if you've ever wanted to know the heart of Jesus, you're in good company, right? Look around. And I'll do my inadequate best to show you a glimpse into the heart of the King that thinks you are worth more than life. So that's the audience. He opened his mouth. And next is the word blessed. And my whole life growing up, everybody I ever heard teach this passage said that blessed meant happy. And it does, but not happy how we think. So I always left those messages and this passage going, that is stupid. Happy are those who mourn? That doesn't even make sense, right? So I kind of stayed away from this passage because I struggled with it. And I was so blessed to read this book, No More Dragons, and he defines that word so well. I'm going to read it to you. First of all, Jesus started out on a happy note. Blessed are, right? The first two words of his sermon sounded like Jesus brought everybody to the top of the hill to announce 3 simple, easy steps that would ensure happiness, financial security, and a long and healthy life. To be fair, that's what many of us think of when we hear the word blessed, right? We think, hold on. When we hear the word blessed, we think, the Lord blessed us with a beautiful baby. Or the Lord blessed my company, and now we have a lot of money and bought a big house. Or the Lord has blessed my family, and that's why we're happy and healthy. And I'm not sure that using the word blessed is always a bad thing, but in the context of this sermon, blessed, when Jesus uses it, is translated from the Greek word makarios. And it has nothing to do whatsoever with the happiness we so often connect to our circumstances, health, family, or savings account. Instead, makarios, sorry, that's a hard word, makarios literally translates full of God, fully and wholly satisfied in God, connected to God, and having God live in you. And another author I read had this analogy that really explains it, I thought, very well. He said this, that the word makarios was used of the island of Cyprus in Jesus' day. And that was because on the island of Cyprus, it was so prosperous and so wealthy and so fertile that you never had to leave Cyprus to have a happy and full and content life. So if we apply that, Makarios means this island of blessed happiness, and we apply that to God in our lives, being on this island of God where you never need to leave, because everything you need for a full, happy, and content life is on this island of God. So when we read blessed, it's living on this island. Otherwise, good luck. Good luck living out these Beatitudes. Without being on God's island, it's pretty much the only way that these are possible or they make sense. And the word beatitude simply means proverb of Jesus, something like that. Saying of Jesus is all that it means. But when I was growing up, all the guys I remember would say, well, this is how you're supposed to be. So this is a beatitude because this is how you are supposed to be. And I always left those messages feeling this incredible burden to be these things. That I was going to work really hard and be these things. And I think as we go through these, you will see that is so far from the truth, it's not even funny. And that these attributes have very little to do with our ability and have a lot to do with God's ability. And the first of these Beatitudes is verse 3. And it says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And this word poor means destitute, absolutely broke, unable to care for yourself, completely dependent on the help of others. And a lot of people at first glance, me included, read this and, oh yeah, Jesus, he was always looking out for the less fortunate and the poor people. But that's not his point here. His point here is your soul. You are destitute, impoverished, completely unable to help yourself in regards to you. The very essence of who you are is irrevocably shattered by sin. And I don't think it was a mistake that Matthew put this first. Because without knowing this truth, that we are unable to do this, the rest of the Beatitudes don't make sense. And I imagine that many people in this audience were a little weirded out by now. You know, they came to hear this rabbi teach them about religion or spiritual insight or do some miracles maybe. Sing us a song, Jesus. And here he is saying this to them. Hey, if you want to live a full life on this island of God, you have to realize you don't bring anything to the table. It's all God. I'm not talking about health or your bank account. I'm talking about your soul and your complete and utter inability to experience God's peace if you think you can solve the problems of your soul on your own. I imagine at this point that some people started to leave. And some people were like, what is this guy talking about? And totally engaged. So that doesn't mean you can leave now, by the way. And as counterintuitive as it sounds, only when we admit that we are beggars sitting at the feet of Jesus can we begin to understand this island of God. And isn't that what we really are? Beggars? Trying to show other beggars where to find the food of life. You know, we face this kingdom life together, and we face spiritual poverty and spiritual wealth through Christ together. And we also face the hurt of this world together. Read verse 4 with me. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. $1,457,623,400. 1,457,623,400. This was the number of babies killed by abortion since 1980. And that was when I wrote this. That ticker was moving up every few seconds of another child without life. In the world, there are 196 countries. In 91 of them, it's safe to be a Christian. In 105, it is not. Christian Freedom International has estimated that in the 20th and 21st centuries, more Christians have been killed for their faith than in the previous 19 combined. And I could go on about things that we mourn on this large scale. This scale of sin has invaded our world, and it causes a lot of pain. And that's one sense that Jesus is talking about mourning here, is this mourning on this big scale of what sin has done in the world. But he's also talking about you and me. He's talking about the damage that's been done to us and the damage that we've done to others. He's talking about the losses that we have caused and the losses that we experience. When my mom was dying from cancer, we had a blessing. There's a real big benefit, as gross as it sounds, to watching someone you love die. And that is, you get to love them while they die. You get to mourn a little bit while they're in the process of dying. And one day, we were sitting around the kitchen talking about that loss. You know, we were grieving together, my family. And the hospice counselor came in, and he's, you know, his job is to grief counsel. And he said, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And we said, "Well, you know, not too good, but what can you do besides trust the Lord?" And you could see him visibly relax. You could see him go, "Oh." And what he said next, I will never forget. He said, "It is so much easier to counsel people with faith. When I go to homes where people are dying and they don't have faith, it's impossible to comfort them because they have no hope." Well, we might not have a lot, but we do have hope, don't we? And for those of you that are mourning, whether on that large scale or a personal scale, I know this sounds so insufficient, but I just encourage you to focus on the comfort, not the loss. And I know that's not what we do. We're humans, we focus on the negative. But when you're mourning, from personal experience, I can tell you that when I focused on the comfort of God, it was so much easier to tolerate the loss. And I can also tell you that God's comfort is much better than the loss. He is real and alive, and he cares when we hurt. I don't know why, but he does. The next piece of Jesus' heart I'd like to read with you about how to live kingdom life is in verse 5. "Blessed are the gentle, for they shall inherit the earth." Now, many of your translations will say meek or humble. And so I looked up the definition for meek on Google, and here's what it said. It said, meek, quiet, gentle, and easily imposed on, submissive. That is not what this word means at all. This word, my favorite analogy is the ancient war horse. In ancient days, the most powerful force, I'm going to read you a devotion. The most powerful force on the battlefield was the war horse. These 2,000-pound beasts were trained from birth to fight. They were trained to strike with their front hooves and kick with their back, on command. They were trained to face spikes and spears. They were trained to charge into fire. They were trained to do whatever they were told to do in combat, on command. And the way those commands were given, the touch of a toe, the push of a knee, the click of a tongue, or the strike of a heel. The rider's hands were busy, right, with weapons. So all of his commands were given with his mouth or mostly his legs. That's a full ton of animal strength. Most of those big horses were 1,800 to 2,000 pounds. And any of you that have worked with animals know that you can pretty much quadruple that in what they can exert in strength. I mean, there's nothing like trying to get a little calf on the ground. I remember one time we were trying to brand a calf, and I was young and dumb and trying to do it the muscle way. And this old cowboy said, "Yep, they got four-wheel drive, Jason." Because they do. They got all four legs are going. So that's a full ton of animal strength, the greatest weapon on the battlefield, under the command of a touch. It's mind-boggling to think of all that power under that kind of restraint. Some of these horses were so vicious that only the guy that had trained them could even approach them. And in our world, or at least mine, I think we get strength all wrong. We tend to measure strength by exertion. We measure strength by how much force we can expel, but apply that to your life. What takes greater strength? When your kids talk to you disrespectfully, what's easier? To lash out in response or to reply with control? What requires more strength? When you're driving and someone pulls out in front of you, what's easier? To get upset and wave at them in that special way, or to assume they have an emergency just like you do sometimes? What takes more strength? When your spouse isn't careful with their words or your heart, what's easier? To respond in the same way or to give a gentle answer? What requires more strength? It seems the greater strength is in how much we don't use our power. And this is what Jesus is talking about in this verse when he says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." He's not equating meekness with being weak. He's equating meekness with strength under control. And just like that war horse for us, the greater strength lies in control, not in exertion. And if you think that meek equals weak, try it for one day. Try for one day to control everything that comes out of your mouth and everything that your body does. And you tell me how weak it is. Speaking of weakness, one of my great weaknesses is food. I blame the Marine Corps. You'll see why in a second. So verse 6, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." All right, so let me tell you a little bit about my experience with food in the Marine Corps. And we're blessed, and most of us in this room don't really experience a lot of hunger unless we're on a diet and we make ourselves experience it. But in boot camp, my first 26 hours in boot camp, they keep you awake and they yell at you a lot. And I think maybe they fed us, I can't remember, because it was just this haze of being yelled at. And we got to stand on the yellow Marine Corps footprints, and from that, I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but in the parking lot at the Marine Corps depot, training depot, they set you down on how to stand at attention. They have these big, beautiful Sesame Street yellow footprints in the pavement, and you go stand on them, and then they yell at you the rest of the next 8 weeks, or 12 weeks, excuse me. And so there I was, going to the chow hall for my first meal after 26 hours of this, and I'm, so nice, because they're not yelling at me in there. And I got my tray, and I go get in line, and it's fried chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy. And I was, this is going to be so good. Actually thinking back, it might have been rabbit, but it didn't matter. That's a whole nother joke, but I'll just tell you real quick. Side note, in Camp Pendleton, there are rabbits everywhere. And one day we were walking to chow hall, and there weren't that many rabbits, and guess what was on the menu? So anyway, so back to boot camp. So there I am with my tray, and I go and I sit down at this table, and I am so grateful that it's quiet, I get to eat. And I took, I think it was about bite number 3 of this succulent fried animal when I heard, "Done! You're done! Get to the line!" And I realized at that point that if I was going to eat, I had to better eat quickly at boot camp. So that gives you a little bit of our mindset when we're in boot camp. Totally a different story. I mean, we would have guys bring back a stack of bread like that just because they were hungry. Because they didn't monitor how much bread we would take. So Yeah, we did half a loaf just to get something in us. Well, one day we were going on our first really long march, and I think it was 13 miles. It might have been 11. In 10 more years, it'll be 20. So, and we had a little stint about 3 miles, if I remember right, where we marched to this Quonset hut, one of those metal half-circle huts, and this big storage facility where we got issued our full pack, so we'd be walking the rest of the time with full gear. And at that time, they set us down on this big concrete slab out in the middle of the California desert, so, full of sand and dirt, and we were sitting down to have lunch. And we had to sit down, I can't even do it, I'm so old now, had to sit down, spread legged like this and in a row. So you'd have a row of guys sitting like this. So you had about that much room in front of you. And they would issue you your MRE. And you weren't allowed to do anything until they told you to. I mean, that's just how the whole of basic training worked. And they would pass these out, and we'd sit there, and we'd hold them, and they'd say, hold up your MRE. So we'd have to hold up our MRE. And they would say, open your MRE. And mine weren't quite this fancy. Mine were just brown. I think they were from the tail end of Vietnam War, and there was only about 3 of them that you actually wanted to eat. God, they were just so horrible. If you got eggs, oh, no. Eggs was bad. So this one's cheese tortellini, which sounds good. But so anyway, they would tell you, hold your MRE, open your MRE. So we'd open it. And then we had to do this. We had to go through it, and we didn't even have half this stuff. We had to pass everything forward that was remotely good. Hot beverage bag. Oh, no. No coffee for recruits. You've had to pass that forward. What's this? Oh, a heater. No warm food for recruits. No, you don't get warm food. Chocolate flavored. Nope. Pass that forward. Your accessory pack, only has toilet paper and gum, salt. Oh, no, you don't get to keep that. Pass that forward. Let's see, what else? Oh, fruit punch. How nice. Oh, no. Pass that forward. We did not have any candy in ours. Lucky military people today. But if we would have had this, oh my goodness. Yeah. Pass it forward. We got to keep our spoon. And we got to keep all the rest of that, which was very nice of them, right? So we pass all that forward, and they would Marine Corps drill instructors, I don't know if there's a crueler being on the face of the universe. Cruel. When we got our food, they would give us a time limit to eat it. I'll never forget when I first got back from boot camp, went to Rowan's, and I sat there with all my friends, and I ate my lunch, and I look up, and they're all staring at me. And I don't even know if I tasted the wonderful French fries, but I did. They were so much better than basic training. And so you ate really fast and walked fast. Man, nobody could keep up with me when I first got back from boot camp. So we were sitting down like this on this nasty concrete slab, and they said, hold up your main meal, which was, your main meal. And I was so lucky I got one of the 3. I got ham slices, or ham chunk, actually. It's a chunk of ham about that thick. And I was so excited because you could take the ham and the crackers, and you could pretend like you were having a ham sandwich. So I was so excited. I got ham, and I'm holding it up in the air, going, oh, yes. I imagine saliva's dripping off my chin by this point. And they say, open your main meal, and they would do this to us with the countdown. They'd say 30, 29, 28, 15, 10, 9, 5. I'm not exaggerating. They would count like that. They would skip numbers. So there I am, and I open up my ham slice, and it falls to the ground in front of me. And I just went, I am hungry. And I picked that thing up, and I can tell you from experience that young Marine recruits' teeth are stronger than sand. So while most of us may not ever experience that kind of hunger, and Jesus' audience did. For them, it wasn't unusual to have one piece of meat in a week. So for them, starvation could be a day or two away of being really, really hungry. I mean, could you imagine only getting one cheeseburger a week? My goodness. I'd melt away to nothing. I was really blessed, never have been thirsty. However, they did the opposite in boot camp. They would make us drink half a gallon of water every morning in about 15, I'm exaggerating, but about 30 seconds. But Jesus' audience, they would travel on a business trip from Emmett to Boise in August on foot. So just imagine walking on foot with a canteen from here to Boise. That's some pretty hot stuff. Similar geography as well, or topography. And when a sandstorm hit, they had no choice, but they would wrap their face with a cloth and put their back to the storm and hope that water could be found after the storm. So they knew what it was like to be intensely hungry and intensely thirsty. And I don't know your story, so some of you may have had those times. Maybe just camping, you forgot to pack enough food and you got really hungry. I don't know. But if you have had times of intense hunger or intense thirst, just take a second and remember how desperate you were. I mean, a snack or a sip was never going to be enough. And just take a second and think about that feeling of desperation you had. Got it? Nobody's nodding their head. All right. So hold on to that thought, that desperation. Usually in Greek, when the words hunger and thirst are used, they're used with a genitive participle that makes them, at least I think that's what it's called. I'm not very good at Greek. But it connotates that you're going to be hungry, so I'm going to have a piece of bread, not the whole loaf. I'm going to be thirsty, so I'm going to have a glass of water, not the whole pitcher. And that part of grammar is usually there in Greek when they talk about being hungry or thirsty. Well, Jesus breaks the grammar rules. Can you believe it? He breaks all the rules, including grammar, and the word that he used meant that he wanted his audience to be hungry for all the righteousness of God, to be thirsty for all of the justice of God. So now, remember that feeling of desperation you had when you were thinking of being hungry or thirsty. And how differently would I live if desperation was the word people used to describe my desire to deepen my relationship with the Lord? Wouldn't it be cool to hear someone say, man, that Mike, he is desperate to know God more. Or, wow, that Amber, she is desperate to have God guide her life. Wouldn't that be cool? That'd be a high compliment, wouldn't it, for somebody to say that about us? And may we all be that. I think that's one of the highest compliments I think we could ever give somebody. Man, you sure seem desperate to know the Lord. It's almost as good as your kids calling you their friend, right? I mean, that's a high compliment to me. And the next thing that Jesus taught us about his heart is in verse 7, and it is impossible. Unless you're living on this island of God, this is not possible. Verse 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. One of the most terrifying pieces of instruction that I ever had in my life was in regards to the Lord's Prayer. And the Lord's Prayer you guys are familiar with, right? Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And on verse 12 down there, I believe it is, he says, forgive us our sins, debts, transgressions, right? Whatever version you're looking at, that's usually one of the three words. As we forgive those who sin against us or owe us or trespass against us. And that little word as means in the same manner. Forgive us our sins in the same manner as we forgive those who sin against us. If that doesn't terrify you, I don't know what will. How many times have we rebelled? How many times have we spit in God's face? How many times have we held that nail and the hammer? Is it even possible to measure the mercy that's been extended to us on an individual scale, let alone a collective scale? The disciples, they once asked Jesus how many times they should show mercy. And if you want to turn with me there to Luke, Gospel of Luke, chapter 17. Gospel of Luke, chapter 17. I'm going to start in verse 3. So Luke 17, verse 3. Be on your guard. If your brother sins, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times a day and returns to you 7 times, saying, I repent, forgive him. And I love the apostles' response in verse 5. Lord, increase our faith, because we ain't doing that. It's impossible, isn't it? And it is impossible unless you're living on that island of God. And what did Jesus tell us about the impossible? He said, with men, that's impossible, but with God, all things are possible, right? Including showing mercy to each other. Speaking of impossible, let's go on to verse 8. Back to Matthew, chapter 5. And verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And this word pure means unmixed. It means no impurities. They would use it in regards to metal, that silver would be pure. If it was unalloyed, unmixed metal, this is the word they would use. And for us, pure in heart is unmixed motives. Psalm 24, I would imagine, leapt to a lot of Jesus' audience's mind when he said that. Psalm 24, if you'd like to turn there, you can. We'll start in verse 3. It's a familiar psalm. We read it up here on very frequently, because it should be read very frequently. Psalm 24, starting in verse 3, and we'll read 4 and 5. Who may ascend into the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to falsehood, and has not sworn deceitfully, he shall receive a blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. And that phrase, pure heart, not lifted up soul to falsehood, and never sworn deceitfully, well, that has a lot to do with our motives. And I'd like to read from another book. Where he talks about this pure in heart. And he says this. He says, this beatitude demands from us the most exacting self-examination. Is our work done from motives of service or from motives of pay? Is our service given from selfless motives or from motives of self-display? Is the work we do in church done for Christ or done for our own prestige? Is our church going an attempt to meet God or just meeting a habit? Are even our prayer and our Bible reading engaged with the sincere desire to be in company with God? Or do we do them just because it gives us a pleasant feeling of superiority for having done them? Is our religion a thing in which we are conscious of nothing so much as the need of God within our hearts? Or is our religion a thing in which we have comfortable thoughts of our own holiness? To examine one's own motives is a daunting and a shaming thing, for there are few things in this world that even the best of us do with completely unmixed motives. When our motives are focused on God's kingdom and God's will, and not building our kingdom and our will, we will see God. And many of you know this. You will see God now. It doesn't wait for the future. Of course, we're going to see him in the future, but we start to see him now. And it's hard to describe this, but many of you I know have experienced this. That you've had times in your life where you know where God is responsible for whatever you're experiencing, right? Isn't that a kind of seeing him? Isn't it seeing him in the faces of those we forgive and in the faces of those who forgive us? We see God when help comes from nowhere. We see him when peace that passes understanding fills us. And sometimes God gives us that peace from inside, right? Sometimes, I remember one morning I was just angry, and I decided to be angry. I mean, I had made a conscious decision. I am going to be angry. And I was. Boy, howdy was I. My kids, I don't think, even talked to me that morning. They just saw me stomping through the house. And I know this is wrong, right? So I'm praying, okay, God, let's see how powerful you are. See if you can fix my anger. And being a jerk, really. Thankfully, God's big enough for my jerkiness and my anger. And I was in the Grace Building, actually looking outside the window and praying. And I felt something inside me. I can't explain it, but deep down in the core of who I am, of peace. And I had a brief moment in there where I had a decision. And I could have accepted this peace, or I could have rejected it. I could have said no. God always gives us choice, guys. And thankfully, I chose to accept it. And I had a great day, because when you're filled with that kind of peace, you're unassailable, right? You can't be attacked. There's nothing that can affect you. And sometimes that peace comes from inside of us, but sometimes that peace comes from us. It comes from the broken, forgiven. And that's our next beatitude, is the peacemakers. And Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons and daughters of God. And this word peace, I love how this word is defined. The word means the absence of all bad things and the presence of all good things. And I am also thrilled. I love that definition, but I also love that Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, not the peace lovers. Because making peace is hard. And we live on that island of God when we're making peace. In other words, those who do the hard work of trying to remove the bad from whatever situation they find themselves in and fill those situations with good, they are living on that island of God. Let me say that again. If you fashion your life to live in such a way that when you meet or even cause a bad situation, you are blessed if you do the hard work of trying to make that situation all good. This beatitude says to face bad situations and conquer those situations with peace. Conquer them with peace. I love that phrase. It's actually mine. I didn't steal that from anybody. Go to war against the unpeaceful things in your life and actively seek to make them peaceful. And remember when the apostles asked Jesus to increase their faith in this area of forgiveness? It's the same here. Our faith has to be increased to be this kind of peacemaker. It's only available if we're living on this island of blessedness called God. An island where we know he is in total and complete control, and he cares about us. It staggers me every time I think about it, to think about those gigantic suns out there in the universe. Beetlejuice is one. There's whatever. There's these huge stars out there that make our sun look like a marble. And this God is so powerful. He created these amazing, amazing things, and yet he calls us by name. How? He's amazing. And he cares about you. He cares about whatever you're facing right now. As crazy as it seems, he does. And without that knowledge that he is in complete control and that he cares about me, I can't do the next beatitude, and neither can anybody else. We're going to read 10, 11, and 12. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men cast insults at you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I can't remember the last time where somebody insulted me because of my faith, and I said, this is great. Man, I can't wait to see what they're going to do to me next. But I'm going to try that next time it happens. I am. I'm going to say, wow, this is awesome. It's crazy. The whole, I was praying with somebody after last service, and in her prayer she said, this upside-down kingdom we find ourselves in. And it is. We live in an insane, impossible kingdom, this island of God. And can you imagine what Jesus' audience was like at this point? That audience that's an awful lot like us. I imagine that they're thinking or saying, so you're telling us, Jesus, okay, you're telling us that if we live on this island of God, this island of blessing you're talking about, that some people will get angry at us with no reason. And they will lie about us. They will sabotage us. They will do anything just to get that weird, warm vengeance feeling toward us, even though we've done nothing wrong. And you want us to sign up for this. And Jesus says, yeah. Because it is crazy. But last time I checked, the cross was insane. Last time I checked, the crazy, amazing, perfect love that he has for us was displayed on that cross. And that's crazy. Just like what he's asking us to be here. And unfortunately, this will happen even from fellow Christians. And when it does, plant yourself firmly on the middle of that island of God, and you'll find yourself surrounded by men and women who've been there before. You'll find yourself surrounded by people who have been hurt and rejected and executed for the name of Jesus Christ. Next time you feel rejected or hurt, whether it's from inside the church or outside the church, read Hebrews chapter 11 and read about the heroes of the faith who were executed by the people of God. Not just hurt, they were put to death. And you'll find yourself in some awesome company on that crazy island of God, that blessed island of God. When our connection with God is real, the hurt of this place is distant. And not all the time. We ebb and flow, just like the ocean. But when we're in that spot where we're in that center of that island of God, there's nothing that can stop us. And I mentioned earlier that when I've heard this passage taught to me in the past, I felt like the pressure to be these things. I fell for the lie that now that I was a Christian, I have to figure out this Christian life by my own power. And that Jesus gave me this list in Matthew to give me 8 easy steps to being a good Christian. And now it's up to me to figure out how to be good. And that is a lie. I know of no greater lie in the Christian world. Jesus didn't see you and me in our muck and our filth and our rebellion and our anger and our hatred and all of that mess, distant from him. And he sees us in all of that mess and says, I love you. I desire you. I want to be with you. And then for whatever reason, he calls us and we said yes. And he didn't see us over here. And as soon as we say yes, he walks away and says, okay, figure out Christianity on your own. That is a lie. He said, if you want to live on this impossible island of blessing, there's only one thing you have to do. Know him. Know him. He is desperately in love with you. And he desperately wants a relationship with you. He never promised us once that this gospel life we're facing was going to be easy. As a matter of fact, he promised us the opposite, right? He said, in this world you will have trouble. But he also promised us this, that I will never leave you nor forsake you. And right now, as we head into communion, to remember the time he took all of our imperfection from us and impossibly put his perfection on us. I don't know what you're facing. I don't know what lies the enemy is telling you, but I do know this. Jesus' heart for you and me in this gospel life is be. Be still and know that he is God. He is God of your needy spirit. He is God of your mourning. He is God of your strength and your desire for righteousness. He's a God big enough for your forgiveness. He's a God big enough to forgive those who have hurt you. He is God of your motives. He is God of the wars you face, and he is God when you are attacked. In all of these things, simply know him and be on this island of God. And if you don't know him, I don't invite you up to communion, but I do invite you to know him. Give him your heart and join this motley crew we call the church. And as it's nothing fancy. Just say, I trust you with my heart. That's all I got. I only got one. But I give it to you. You will never break it, I promise you. And say, I want to know you as King of my life. Then come forward and join us in communion. But if you do that decision today, stay up here with us so we can pray with you. And if you do know him, and you've been like me, and this life has just gotten in the way of your relationship with your King, I want to encourage you right now to take a breath and just be. Relax. Know that Jesus is God of whatever circumstance you find yourself in, and that he is worthy of your trust. So when we come forward, we'll take communion, just come through for the middle aisle. Great God, we are amazed that you would call us from death and into life, but you have. For whatever reason, you've chosen us to be your bride, and it blows my mind. Lord, you are so good to us. I ask you to be with me and my brothers and sisters as we face the world this week, that you let us be these kind of people you describe in Matthew 5, people of peace, people of comfort, people who are looking for solutions that revolve around your will in our lives. And Lord, I ask you, let us be men and women who lead our families to Jesus Christ, the great King who thought we were worth dying for. In his name we pray. Amen.